For over 20 years, this child went unidentified. That Teresa Black is responsible for her child's death.
Teresa had a huge decision to make. It was the wrong decision.
I think something unfortunate happened, that you were scared.
And when I woke up, he didn't wake up. He didn't wake up.
After more than 2 decades, the chilling mystery of 6-year-old William DaShawn Hamilton's death finally reached a courtroom. His body was discovered in a Georgia forest in 1999, but it wasn't until 2022 that authorities linked his death to his mother, Teresa Black. Charged with murder, child cruelty, and concealing a death, Black's trial revealed a lot. But the verdict may not be what you expect. We're going to break down the top moments from this cold case trial. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, we're going to continue our trial recap series now with that of Teresa Black. So this is the woman who faced a jury back in December of 2023 for the death of her 6-year-old son, William DaShawn Hamilton. And what makes this case very unique and chilling is that this is a boy who had been dead for over 2 decades before his identity was finally discovered. This all began in February 1999, when the young boy's body was discovered in a wooded area near a small church cemetery in DeKalb County, Georgia. And despite the efforts by authorities, including a clay facial reconstruction of the boy's face, investigators just couldn't figure out who this was. They couldn't identify him. And so this case went cold. For years, the boy remained nameless. There were no reports of a missing child that matched his remains. But there was something. His clothing and the condition of his body suggested he had been cared for. But it seemed, again, no one came forward to claim him. But then, in 2019, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released new facial reconstruction images to show what the boy may have looked like. And this would lead to a break in the case in 2022 on a tip from a woman named Ava McNeil. Remember that name, because she said she knew William and she helped authorities identify him officially as William DaShawn Hamilton. And investigators learned that William's mother, Teresa Black, had never reported him missing, which prevented this case from being solved sooner. July of 2022. Teresa Black was officially arrested in Phoenix, Arizona, after being identified as the mother of this boy found dead in the woods. Now, authorities allege that Black was responsible for the death of her son by giving him a combination of medicines, striking him in the head, and then failing to get him medical treatment and not reporting his death. Black faced numerous charges: 2 counts of felony murder, 2 counts of cruelty to children, aggravated assault, and concealing the death of another. So, with all of that in mind, now let's take a look back at this cold case murder trial against Teresa Black. We're going to break down the top moments for you. You know where we have to start. We have to start with the opening statements like we always do in any of these trial recap series. So prosecutor Shannon Hodder told the jury in her opening statement that Teresa Black killed her son after giving him just too much cold medication. And instead of trying to help him, to save him, she just chose to dump his body in the woods to conceal his death. She even described a police interview with Black where she admitted that William was in her care when he died.
When she begins talking about her son, she initially says that she lost contact with him because she moved to Atlanta with her son, didn't have the means to take care of him, and left him with a friend that she met in Atlanta, and had lost touch with him by the time he was age 7 and hasn't heard from him since. Officers didn't believe that story, and they kept pressing. They challenged it. They said, so you really believe that you have a 30-year-old son alive out there living in Atlanta? She said she did. She did. They show her the artistic rendering of the little boy that was found dead in DeKalb County. They tell her that they believe that William is dead, and they believe she knows something about it. For a while, she keeps up the act. Very surprised, can't believe he's dead, very upset. But finally, Teresa admits that not only does she know that William was dead, but she was with him and he was in her care when he died. She tells officers that she moved to Atlanta looking for a fresh start with William. That initially she was staying in hotels, but her money ran out quickly. And at that point, they were having issues with housing, finding enough to eat. They were sleeping in random parks and places where they could find, and eating out of dumpsters. Ms. Black indicated that they were wandering around and came across these woods one night looking for a place to sleep. That she knew something was wrong with William, and she never went to a doctor. She never took him to a hospital or an urgent care center. And that they went to sleep in these woods that she came across one night, and the next morning she woke up and William was dead. She didn't know what to do, so she left him there. In the context of the relationship that he had with his mother, the way he was being treated, the way his body was hidden in the woods, the fact that Teresa was not honest about giving him medications, this all became very concerning. You're going to hear that while these are over-the-counter substances, diphenhydramine and acetaminophen can be toxic to children. And you have to be very careful in how you administer these drugs to children. And that's why, as I'm sure you all know from your common experience, there are lots of instructions about properly medicating children with these substances. And in fact, in children under 6, it's often not even advised that you give these types of medications without the consult and advice of a doctor. Again, that is because these drugs can be specifically toxic to children if not given in the correct doses or if used for an improper purpose. You're going to hear that even if a child is given too much of these medications or the wrong amounts, that can be treated. If you go to the hospital, there are ways to treat that. But if it goes untreated, a child can die a very slow and painful death. The symptoms of this sort of toxicity in a child would be nausea, confusion, fatigue, lethargy, the very symptoms Ms. Black described William having in her interview with the police department. Over the course of the trial, it's going to become clear that Teresa Black is responsible for her child's death. For over 20 years, this child went unidentified. A child doe sitting in a cabinet at the medical examiner's office, waiting to be reunited with his family so that they could properly bury him. It is time to give this child justice.
By the way, we want to keep on bringing you these trial recap shows like this here on Sidebar, and for that, I have to thank our sponsor, our incredible sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, because it's with their support that we can do this. Because look, here's the truth. If you're injured, you have to know what your legal rights are and whether you can be compensated. Well, enter Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. Morgan & Morgan has a dedicated team of over 1,000 attorneys. They have case specialists, paralegals, investigators, an incredible track record, by the way. I'm talking recent verdicts of $12 million in Florida and $26 million in Philadelphia. Mind you, these are considerably higher than the highest insurance offers in these cases. There's no upfront fee. They only get paid if you get paid. The whole process can be done right from your smartphone. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar. Defense attorney Sam Welty, in contrast, argued that this little boy's death was just a tragic accident, that William wasn't feeling well the day of his death, and Black had tried to help him by giving him medicine, and he pointed out to the jury that a determination could never be made about how much medicine was actually in the boy's system when he died. And he described to the jury the heartbreaking moment when Black realized that her son was dead, and also the moment she decided to make a very big mistake in leaving him.
She panicked, but she didn't leave right away. She paced around. After a few minutes later, she tried to wake him again, but it became clear to her that he was not getting up and he was not breathing. So for the next day, she laid with him. She stayed there with him and hoped for a miracle that his eyes would open and he would get up and they would start their day, but that never happened. And at that point, Teresa had a huge decision to make, and she will tell you herself that it was the wrong decision. What she did was leave William there in his Timberland boots, double knotted, with his thermal jacket and his pants, and she walked away. But like the detective who interviewed her is gonna say, and you're gonna hear from directly, that is not murder. That is not murder. Speaking of that interview, the state is correct. She did not tell the truth right away. She hadn't told anybody this for years. For 20 years, this guilt was inside of her. These people are strangers. Of course, she's not going to tell them right away. But ultimately, in that interview room, she tells them the truth. And she cries. And she tells them what happened. She tells them the truth that lines up with the physical evidence. She tells them the truth that lines up with her and William's life together. She tells them the truth, and she'll tell you the truth that lines up with the experts in this case that you're going to hear from. And we have an expert as well who is a medical examiner who also came to some very important conclusions that I want to highlight for you. As it pertains to the skeletal muscle that they found of Williams, the state's correct. No conclusions, these medical examiners will tell you no conclusions can be drawn from that skeletal muscle. No conclusions can be drawn about how much was in his system. They can tell you it was in his system. They can tell you it was near his death. They cannot tell you how much, and they will not, because it's not scientifically possible to. You're also going to hear from the original toxicologist in this case. His name is Dr. George Jackson. He's a leader in his field. He's going to confirm to you, you cannot derive a concentration of a drug from the skeletal muscle. The state's theory in this case is undermined by science. The state's theory in this case is undermined by their own experts. These experts cannot show you and will not show you lethal levels of cough medicine in William's system.
So during the trial, several witnesses testified, including the investigators who actually found William's body. But maybe the most heartbreaking testimony came from the woman who helped police identify little William. Remember I mentioned her, Ava McNeil. And McNeil told the jury that she was best friends with Teresa Black when they lived in North Carolina in the late 90s prior to moving to Atlanta. And she claims she witnessed signs of apparent neglect, which she described in detail.
What was Teresa's relationship with William like?
Standoffish. Like, I don't know, like maybe she didn't really want to be bothered.
How would Teresa communicate with William?
In a detached way.
Did you have any observations about William or his appearance that caused you any concern?
Yes.
What did you observe?
She didn't like to keep his hair cut. He wasn't regularly bathed. He did have nice clothes.
You indicated that he wasn't regularly bathed. How could you tell?
Because I bathed him. And the water would be muddy.
Were there any other indications? Did he ever smell?
Yes, the school notified us that his shoes had a bad odor and he was smelling. And there was an issue.
How was Teresa with allowing William to play and hang out with friends and other people?
She didn't really.
She what? I think.
She didn't allow it really. I kind of overstepped her boundaries as a mom and did certain things. Like make sure he went trick-or-treating. Would say we would walk into the store so he would have a chance to play with his little friend because she didn't allow it for her.
Did you or anyone else ever give things to Teresa for William?
Yes.
What would she be given?
Clothes, Christmas, Halloween, birthday, everything that you would do for a child. The people, the guys, girls that lived in our neighborhood, all of us hung out together. We all did things. Kept his haircut, bought stuff for Christmas, birthday, come over birthday, have a party. We would play with him in the yard. I would go trick-or-treating for him when she didn't allow me to go. I would go. I would take up money and we would all buy big bag of candy from the corner store, like maybe $150 with everybody giving $3, $5, $2 to get up to like $150. Go to the store, buy 2 big bags of candy for him for Halloween because she wouldn't allow me to go trick-or-treating.
William's grandmother doubled down on this too, also testified that she was concerned about William when he was in Teresa Black's care, describing not only terrible hygiene issues, but also changes in his demeanor when he was around his mother.
And at some point when you were able to see William or get custody of William when you got from Teresa, did he smell like urine?
Yes.
All right. And so when he smelled like urine, he came to your residence, what did you do?
I had outfits at my house that I would give him a bath and change him.
And so you bought him clothes?
Yes.
You bought any other items?
Toys?
Toys. Did you buy any shoes or anything of that nature?
Yes.
Do you recall the last pair of shoes you bought William?
The last pair was a pair of Timberlands.
That you bought?
Yes.
And And were you concerned with William the child's hygiene while he was in the custody of his grandparents?
Not really.
Maternal grandparents, thank you.
Not really.
And so you didn't get concerned about his hygiene until after he was in the care of Teresa.
Right.
How long had you had William for that period before you brought him back to Teresa Lake?
Oh, that was on the weekend.
It was a weekend. And so were you instructed by Teresa to have William back by a certain time?
I was.
And what time did she tell you had to have him back?
I had to have him there by 8 because he was going to school.
And what time did you?
About 8:30.
Got there at 8:30. And when you got there at 8:30, what was Teresa's demeanor?
Well, I think she was a little upset with me because she told me I could no longer take him with me. I could come and visit him, but not take him with me.
And when you had to come to her residence to visit him?
Yes.
And so at that point, were you ever able to see William again in your care?
I did not. I think I seen him about 2 more times after that.
So roughly, how old was William the last time you saw him?
Between 5 and 6.
5, 6 years old. Let me ask you this. When you were with William and he was in your care, how was his demeanor?
He was a happy little boy.
And did you allow him to play indoors and outdoors?
Yes.
Was he able to interact with his cousins or other family members?
Yes.
And how did he interact with those family members?
Joyful.
At some point when Teresa came back into his life, did his demeanor change?
Somewhat.
Can you tell the jury by, how did it change?
He wasn't as happy as he was before.
Now, one of the major points of this trial was an interview with Black when police first questioned her on William's disappearance all those years later. And she told police that she had fallen on hard times, that the two of them spent time living in a homeless shelter. And her story was that she left William at a homeless shelter. Problem was, police really weren't buying it.
I need you to be real with people. It's very important. Okay? Lies change in this room. I need you to be very specific with me because if something happened back when you were a young single mother and you got scared or anything like that, I need you to tell me. Because I know where William is, and I think you do.
I don't think you know where he is. Of course, I did not do the right thing. I know that.
I think something unfortunate happened, that you were scared. I'm not saying you killed anybody. This ain't 1994. But I think something happened and you panicked and left Georgia. That's what I think. And it's more than just you being on tough times at a shelter and giving your 6 or 7-year-old son to a stranger. That didn't happen. And I know you didn't hurt your kid. I know. I know things I can't tell you. I just can't let you know that I know.
Oh my God. I didn't know.
I know.
I know that. I know that I wasn't able to feed him right, but we're eating. And we weren't even at the shelters there. We were trying to sleep on like the bus bitches, and we could just buy the place those hours, and the park or wherever. He started. He we want to talk or we want to get up and I didn't know what to do because I figured, okay, man, he's just really hungry. I got to find something to eat. And so I was trying to find something to eat. That didn't seem to help much. he kind of didn't want to do anything. And so we did stuff. I was careful to do it, and I was like, okay. I can find something we can do this. And I said, yeah, just a few ways, and I'll find somebody to help us. And we actually were sleeping like in parks. Me and Tommy were stuck. And then when we laid down for the night, and was it a park? It wasn't like the woods or anything, but it was like with trees and stuff like that. It was away from the road. And we laid down, and when I woke up, he didn't wake up. He didn't wake up.
The prosecution also called a toxicologist to the stand who testified on his findings regarding the medicine that William had ingested. Although the problem there was, due to the decomposed state of the body, he wasn't able to determine how much William had actually ingested.
Are you able to tell the jury, based on the information you found within the samples, when these items were administered into the body?
I can say that the individual was recently exposed to those compounds that I mentioned.
And when you say recently, was it before death or post-mortem?
Oh, it was definitely before death.
Based on the amount of drugs found within the body, are you able to determine, based off your experience, any conclusion as to whether or not this was a lethal dose, overdose, underdose, or any type of frequency in which the skeletal muscle was ingesting these drugs?
Based on the findings and the type of specimen that was submitted, all I can say is the individual was exposed to those compounds. I cannot calculate because it's, the skeletal muscle was decomposed, so I cannot calculate dose, frequency, or whether or not this was acute or chronic exposure.
And that is something the defense honed in on cross-examination. The defense used this uncertainty to their advantage by casting doubt on the way in which William died.
Can you rule out sepsis as a cause of death in this case?
I cannot.
What about food poisoning? Can you rule out food poisoning?
I can't.
Would it be possible to get food poisoning from eating garbage from dumpsters out behind fast food restaurants?
I'm sure it would be.
Somebody with food poisoning, are they likely to experience vomiting?
They most certainly are likely to experience that.
Could that lead to fatigue?
Sure.
Feeling lethargic?
Sure.
Not wanting to talk?
Sure.
What about pneumonia? You mentioned it earlier as a possible lead-in to sepsis.
Yeah, if you have a pneumonia, it's not uncommon to get a bloodstream infection from it and become septic.
What would some symptoms be for pneumonia?
Cough, fever, shortness of breath, coughing up phlegm, sputum. Some people might have some chest pain, particularly when you take a deep breath. I mean, you have some symptom. I mean, most people with pneumonia, you have an idea that they have pneumonia.
Okay. What about a seizure disorder?
Prone to cause sudden death without much of an explanation. And I don't have a brain to examine, so if you're telling me that this child might have had a seizure disorder, could he have died from it? Sure.
Dehydration.
Well, it would go right along with electrolyte imbalance. It depends on how you got dehydrated and how long it took you. Again, dehydration doesn't develop overnight either. It's usually a gradual process.
Any others you can think of from the mind?
Well, we could sit here probably till closing time today.
We're not doing that.
I mean, I could tell you a legion of traumatic deaths this kid could have sustained, and other naturals that you have not brought up that are still there.
And my point here is we don't know how this child died.
You know, Mr. Bozard, if I knew, I wouldn't be sitting here telling this jury that I don't know.
And a lot of these natural causes that I brought up to you, they would often show some of the symptoms that the child was reportedly suffering before he passed away, correct?
Correct. Or they may be completely silent until they pass away.
Is it possible that he could have a couple of things going on at once?
Sure.
He had a cold and then had a seizure disorder that we didn't know about.
How could we say?
And the defense was even able to score a major win in the manner of death, because this witness revealed that even after Black had been charged with murder, he still couldn't determine that this case was in fact a homicide.
You noticed in your autopsy that the child had short, trimmed toenails, correct?
Correct.
And the teeth had no cavities in them. Correct?
Also correct.
And we mentioned his boots on direct, but his boots were both double knotted, right?
Oh yeah, the laces were double knotted. You.
Has there been any changes, Dr. Gallett, in science since 1999 that would change the opinion you gave in that original autopsy?
If there is, I'm not aware of the changes.
Since your review in 1999, that body you observed then has been identified, right?
Correct.
Does that change anything about the science in this case?
No, it just gives us an identification. Makes us feel a little better that we know who he is, but it doesn't change all the rest of the stuff that I testified to.
And it doesn't change anything about the medical evidence in this case, right?
No, does not.
You do not currently have a cause of death by any medical science, correct?
I do not.
And in 1999, you did not declare this case homicide.
I did not.
In 2024, you do not declare this case a homicide.
I still don't.
Talking about the defense's case for a second, at the start of their case, Teresa Black chose not to take the stand. However, there was a forensic pathologist who was called to testify as a potential cause of death and indicated that William could have in fact succumbed to natural causes.
I'd like to start next talking about some possible causes of death for William. Have you formed opinions on other potential possible causes of death for William?
Well, my opinion is that the cause of death is undetermined or unknown, but certainly there are numerous possible causes of death for a child and a child living in this environment.
Could you tell the jury a little bit about what exposure means as far as a cause of death?
In this case, the exposure would be hypothermia or cold exposure, so dying from exposure to cold, so freezing to death.
Could that be a potential cause of death in this case?
Yes.
You mentioned sepsis earlier. Could you tell us a little bit about what sepsis is?
Sepsis is a potentially fatal illness, and it is the body's inappropriate response to the presence of infection. So it's not the infection itself that can cause death. It's the body's response to that infection. And what sepsis does is it causes loss of regulation of normal physiologic processes. So it can cause the heart to function poorly. It can cause the lungs to not properly aerate blood. It can cause the liver to shut down, the kidneys to shut down. It can cause the brain to shut down.
And what could be a potential cause of sepsis?
Well, we're familiar with that type of that type of response the body has to COVID infection, but we're not talking about COVID from 1999. But the more common causes of sepsis include pneumonia and urinary tract infections. Viruses can cause sepsis as well.
And is sepsis a possible cause of death in this case?
Certainly.
Dr. Turner, from your review of this case, is there any evidence to support a conclusion that William died from an overdose of acetaminophen or diphenhydramine?
No.
Is there any evidence to support a conclusion that the zygomatic fracture or any other damage to William's skeleton happened while William was alive?
No.
Is there any evidence to support a conclusion that the manner of death in this case was homicide?
No.
Now, the prosecution presented a theory that Black had hit William in the head, and this was due to evidence of this skull fracture. The defense witness contested this head trauma theory, seemingly pointing to the possibility that animal scavengers is what caused the fracture instead.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the anthropology portion. You also reviewed some reports from anthropologists, is that right?
Yes.
All right. Did you review anything in the case materials concerning a fracture to the right zygomatic arch?
Yes.
Do you have an opinion about this fracture?
Yes.
Could you please share with the jury ultimately what your opinion is?
The anthropologists that reviewed the skeletal remains indicated that there was evidence of animal scavenging. The absence of a portion of the zygomatic arch is in keeping with that observation.
Can you explain a little bit to the jury how a fracture like this would be caused by animal scavenging?
It can be caused by animal scavenging from gnawing. It could be caused from animal scavenging from the animals moving the skull and breaking that bone. That bone is a small, not very thick bone on the face.
And what evidence in this case supports the idea that this fracture was caused by animal scavenging?
Some of the other bones demonstrate changes that are in keeping with animal scavenging or animal gnawing on the bones.
Can you describe those other, the other damaged bones that inform your opinion?
One example is the mandible or the jaw. The ends of the mandible are rough and irregular, in keeping with an animal having gnawed on the two sides of the mandible.
Dr. Turner, in your opinion, is there anything in this case that suggests or leads you to believe this injury was caused before death?
There's no supporting evidence for that.
On cross-examination by the prosecution, they sought to undermine this expert's testimony by suggesting that she couldn't really make an actual determination about what happened to William, and really she couldn't rule out the possibility that something truly nefarious did happen to him.
Let's discuss the skull fracture. You can't rule out traumatic injury while the child was alive, can you?
No.
You agree with Dr. Gowett, correct?
I'm not sure what you're referencing.
That you can't rule out traumatic injury prior to death.
I can't rule it out, but the appearance of the skull with the other evidence of animal scavenging is in keeping with post-mortem damage to the skull.
So the answer to my question is yes, you can't rule it out.
I can't rule it out.
And you can't rule out that there may have been traumatic injury combined with animal scavenging. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
So you agree with Dr. Gowett?
Again, I don't know what Dr. Gowett said.
You didn't read his report?
I read his report. I don't remember him saying that he can't rule out traumatic injury.
Did he commit to how the injury was occurred?
No, he did not.
So you agree with Dr. Gowett? You can't say how the injury occurred.
I can say that more likely than not, that the damage to the skull was from post-mortem animal scavenging.
But you can't rule out that a traumatic injury occurred prior to death, correct?
That's correct.
Just like Dr. Gowett?
That's correct.
And just like the anthropologist in this case, Dr. Tice.
That's correct.
Now let's talk about closing arguments. The last attempt by both sides to summarize this case and make their final push one way or another for the jury. So, during closing arguments, the prosecution painted a picture of a mother who played a role in her son's death, who failed him as a parent, failed to come clean about what she did or allegedly did.
But there was one individual that failed him, and she failed him miserably. And it was the one individual that was supposed to love him unconditionally. And instead, she discarded him as if he was trash and left him in a wooded area to slowly decompose to the point where no one is able to discover who he was for over 23 years. She placed the body in a wooded area. She told you she either took a jacket or a sweater and she laid it on top of him, covering up his body, concealing. And then she lied about it. She lied about it continuously over and over and over again. This defendant gives her child some medicine, some acetaminophen and diphenhydramine, because there may be issues going on or because she needs him to sleep. And then he begins to exhibit symptoms from these drugs. And she tells you in her statement, I will give him anything I can find. She subsequently over-medicates him. You can draw the logical conclusion that that medication that was also found in his skeletal tissue, coupled with her statement that she gave him the drugs, without seeking medical attention, you can infer that the logical result of that conduct can result in death. Criminal intent does not mean the intention to violate the law. We don't have to prove that she intended to kill William. We only have to prove that her actions were prohibited by law. And her actions in her failing to seek medical attention for her son, knowing that he has these symptoms that he has been exhibiting in her care for a few days and failed to get attention, when she is now dealing with something that's outside her expertise, right? When you're sick, you got a cold, you'll take some medicine. And hopefully you'll take the prescribed dosage as notated on the medication. But if you don't get better, you don't continue to take the medicine. And as you continue to deteriorate, you won't not go to the doctor or seek any kind of medical attention to get better. That's unreasonable, especially when you're 6 years old and you can't do it yourself. You have to depend on the person who took you from your family, who uprooted you, moved you to a new state, and that is the only person that you got to depend on. So at 6, he can't do it himself. And so this defendant, who is his parent, has the obligation to make sure the safety and welfare of her son is accounted for. And by doing so, when things of this nature happen, you need to seek medical attention. And if you fail to do so, the natural and necessary consequence of that action can result in death. You heard of testimonies from several doctors that at any point in time, when these medicines are in the system and there's a level where it becomes toxic, you can get medical care and you can live. But if you fail to do so, the consequence of your actions can result in death.
When it came time for the defense to present their closing argument, they reminded the jury that even though Teresa Black surely made mistakes here, was apparently neglectful in her care of William, that doesn't escalate to the point of murder.
There's other things too. That he was dirty when some people bathed him, or that he was a bedwetter, and some mornings he didn't have a bath before going to the babysitter's house. Are these things evidence of murder? If they are, the headlines should read, "Mother convicted of murder for not giving her child Halloween candy." That's ridiculous. We all know that's ridiculous. These things are not evidence. But it's all the state has. So they hope if we pile enough of it together that, sure, one thing's not enough, but also somebody said his feet stunk sometimes. So when you add that in, they want this web to now say, see, we told you. See how she was as a mother? Now they need you to make a leap that she's a cold-blooded murderer. That's ridiculous. Ava said that she was with Teresa and William every day for 4 years. She never said she saw physical abuse. And we need to talk about this. She said that she saw nothing that would make you think she would hurt him. The state says that the Charlotte witnesses can tell you the state of the relationship between William and Teresa. That's the state of the relationship.
So ultimately, who did the jury believe? Take a look.
All right, in the case of the state of Georgia versus Teresa Black, we, the jury, find as to count 1, felony murder, we, the jury, find the defendant, Teresa Black, not guilty. As to count 2, cruelty to children, we, the jury, find the defendant, Teresa Black, not guilty. As to count 3, felony murder, we, the jury, find the defendant, Teresa Black, not guilty. As to count 4, cruelty to children, we, the jury, find the defendant, Teresa Black, not guilty. As to count 5, aggravated assault, we, the jury, find the defendant, Teresa Black, not guilty. As to count 6, concealing the death of another, we, the jury, find the defendant, Teresa Black, guilty. Signed and dated by the foreperson.
Yeah, so Teresa Black was acquitted of 5 of the 6 charges, including murder. But she was found guilty of concealing William's death, and she was sentenced to 10 years in prison, which is the maximum punishment for that charge. And there you have it. This was a cold case that was finally solved. You can stream more gavel-to-gavel trial coverage on our Law and Crime YouTube page. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.